Now I'd like to introduce Tong, who is going to be speaking to us about trade and investment with China and the role of the United States, looking at how can China truly open its economy and what role can Hong Kong play in strengthening U.S.-China trade. We're very pleased to have Tong, who is the Consul General representing the U.S. to Hong Kong and Macau. As Chief of Mission, he leads an interagency team that cooperates with the governments of Hong Kong and Macau in a variety of areas and also provides consular services. He's been a diplomat since 1990, spending much of his career here in Asia. Before Hong Kong, he was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs at the Department of State and the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. And he was a U.S. Ambassador for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC. He served at the National Security Council and the U.S. embassies in Seoul, Beijing, and Manila. He has a degree from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University and studied economics at the U.S. Foreign Service Institute in Tokyo University. He will speak to us, and then we will have time for Q&A. When we get to the Q&A, we'd ask that you identify yourself and your organization. Thank you, and we're very pleased to have Tong speak to us.
Well, thank you, Jody, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back here at the Foreign Correspondents Club. Not only is this a collection of very smart and beautiful people, it also serves good food, so you gotta like that. I actually changed the title of what I'm going to talk about today, just a smidgen, to not just talk about trade and investment in China, but also talk about the implications, not just for the United States, but also for Hong Kong. The goal being to be responsive to this audience and think about these issues from not just the U.S. perspective, but perhaps with some thoughts about the implications for this city. So apropos of that, I actually want to start by presenting Jody with her gift. She's going to give me a coffee mug later. I'm letting the secret out. They're very kind here. They say, what would you like for your gift? Would you like an umbrella because it's raining, or would you like a coffee mug? And I said, I would like to have a coffee mug. So I'm going to get a coffee mug, and so I want to give a coffee mug, and I'm showing this to the TV camera so that they get the chance to see it. You know, the U.S. loves Hong Kong coffee mug. There you go, Jody. Congratulations. Yes, and you are now in an elite fraternity of people that have one of those. The last time, as I said, that I spoke here, I focused on Hong Kong and Hong Kong's unique governance challenges and opportunities under the one country, two systems framework. Today, I'd like to expand the scope of discussion to include mainland China and also focus specifically on economic issues. To be even more specific, today I'd like to discuss a problem that I consider to be one of the most important trade and investment policy challenges that the entire world faces today, which is China's slowness in adopting global norms and best practices for market-based trade and investment transactions. As you might imagine, I've been getting quite a lot of questions recently from friends here in Hong Kong about the United States' approach to this matter. And so this does seem like a good opportunity to explain how the United States government views trade and investment with China and our goals going forward. And given that we all live in Hong Kong and we all love Hong Kong, as demonstrated by this mug, I will also touch on how I see some of the implications of all these issues for this wonderful city, which continues to be a dynamic bastion of free market economics in the Pacific region. So let me start with the United States and then turn to China before concluding with some thoughts on Hong Kong. Perhaps a little personal history is in order. Jody kindly gave an introduction, but let me say that before moving to Hong Kong about 2 years ago, I spent most of the prior 3 decades working as a diplomat, focusing rather specifically on the promotion of free and open trade and investment in the Indo-Pacific region. For example, I was in the room when we decided to negotiate a free trade agreement with Korea. And I was there again when we decided and mapped out the Trans-Pacific Partnership Initiative. And I had the honor of chairing the APEC meetings in 2011 when we collectively took rather giant steps towards eliminating barriers to trade in environmental goods and services and information technology, first regionally and then worldwide. So for my entire career and for many decades before that, I think that America's commitment to free trade and fair trade has been second to none. And I am confident that that has not changed. In fact, America's commitment to defending an open and fair global trading system may in some ways be even stronger than ever, even as we all adapt to new challenges in this century. Let's review some important facts. In 2017, the United States was once again the top trading nation in the world, exporting and importing more than $5 trillion worth of goods and services, or roughly 1/4 of the total value of our economy. According to statistics compiled by the Heritage Foundation, based off of US government data, our average applied tariff rate was just 1.6% last year. This openness is reflected in our history of economic diplomacy as well. The United States, as you all know, was the driving force behind the creation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade back in 1948, as well as the World Trade Organization after that in 1995. The United States is a member of 14 bilateral and regional free trade agreements, including the world's largest such group, the North America Free Trade Agreement. And I'm very glad to see my Canadian colleague here today, and I know we share a strong commitment to that program. The United States led the negotiations that resulted in China's admission to the WTO in 2001. So given our steadfast dedication to market principles, I think that it is clear that the United States will continue to be a leading player in the world economy, even as other partners grow as well. The size of our economy totaled more than $19 trillion in 2017. That figure is, of course, not only the top spot, but it represents nearly 1/4 of the global economy, even though it was produced by only 4% of the world's workers. Perhaps most important for the future, the United States economy is still expanding and improving, recently growing at a brisk pace of about 3% per year. This strong domestic growth means that America is continuing to make a big contribution to global growth through import demand, of course, but also through outward investment, another area where we lead the global rankings. Now, to be sure, the United States has its share of domestic economic challenges, including aging transport infrastructure in some regions. We also need to revamp our education system to meet the demands of rapid advances in information technology. But it is important to remember that the United States continues to drive and energize global growth by being the most innovative economy in the world. According to the most recent World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index, the United States is now the second most competitive economy in the world, right behind Switzerland. The Swiss are always really good. But in fact, 49 of the 100 firms on the 2017 Forbes list of the world's most innovative companies are from the United States. And if you don't like Forbes, 36 of the companies on Clarivate Analytics' top list of the top 100 global innovators in 2017 were also from the United States. So I think it's clear that American innovation touches every industry, and you can see pretty much everywhere the common theme that US companies are the ones at the forefront of developing and deploying disruptive new technologies as they work to deliver value to their customers. But beyond all that bragging, here's the key point. The United States economy achieved its strong economic position by liberating the creativity of its people and that of our partners, by using transparent, fair, and democratic processes to tackle problems, both large and small. That market-based creative process has worked well, from building out our highway system, to cleaning our environment, to creating the world's most productive agricultural system, to creating and then revolutionizing the world's energy production methodologies, to developing the digital economy. And we have shared our resulting prosperity with the rest of the world through trade and through investment. I actually think that China and Hong Kong understand well the prosperity that trade with America brings. Indeed, the United States is inextricably linked with China's current economic success. American companies have contributed expertise and capital to China's development for decades, and the United States remains China's top single-nation trading partner. In fact, it takes entire communities, the entire European Union, for example, or all of ASEAN, to match the value of the US market for China's international trade. If we look at foreign direct investment, US investment in China totaled $93 billion in 2016, which was up 10% over the previous year, led by manufacturing, wholesale trade, and non-bank holding companies. And as for Hong Kong, the United States is this city's largest trading partner beyond the mainland, and its fifth largest supplier of imported goods overall. Two-way trade in goods and services, in fact, has now reached close to $70 billion each year, and it is still growing. And Hong Kong also remains an important entrepot for trade, merchandise trade flowing between the United States and China. In 2016, approximately 9% of China's exports to the United States and about 7% of China's imports from the United States passed through Hong Kong's ports. So maintaining a healthy US-China trade and investment relationship is clearly important to Hong Kong as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the issue of the day. Amid all the good news that I just relayed about trade among nations creating greater prosperity, why then is the United States now calling foul and demanding that China change its ways? Or to reframe the question more positively, what can mainland China do to truly open its economy? What can China do to be a better and fairer trading partner for the other economies of the world? China's undeniable path of reform and opening over the past 40 years, starting from a position of almost complete economic repression, was certainly visionary, and it led directly to the prosperity we see in China today. I can understand why leaders such as Deng Xiaoping and Zhu Rongji are so revered in China for pushing forward a process of change. However, the work that they started is far from finished. Perhaps most worrisome, actually, is the sense that we have in the United States that China's forward progress on economic reform and opening in recent years has stalled. In fact, depending on the issue under consideration, there are some worrisome signs that things may actually be moving backward. Now, China is the world's second largest economy, and the largest outright if weighted to the purchasing power of its population. But China is not yet a true market economy. China ranks actually 110th on the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom, for example, reflecting the extensive state ownership and far-reaching state intervention in the economy. Recently, in fact, the nation appears poised to move in the direction of putting the Communist Party at the center of most important economic and social decisions, including decisions that were previously made by private business people, even as the government has doubled down on central government control and planning and state-ordered investment. China's pure size and international economic success has fostered the idea, as expressed by some people, and I sometimes hear this in Hong Kong, that it is okay for China to ignore global trading rules and norms. And some thought leaders in China are even championing the narrative that a non-transparent, state-dominated approach to running an economy is a legitimate alternative to free and fair markets where everyone can participate. And America, meanwhile, is left to worry that China may actually just want to pick and choose which global rules and norms it will follow and which ones it will not. So for the United States, the result of this situation is growing disappointment. The US-China trade and investment relationship, which should by now, based on scale alone, be one of the closest and most beneficial in world history, is instead quite badly skewed and not really as productive for either side as it should be. In 2017, the United States recorded a record large $375 billion deficit in our trade in goods with China. Now, of course, macroeconomic factors can explain some of this imbalance. And as you know, American consumers have a high propensity to borrow and spend, while Chinese citizens are incentivized to keep their precautionary savings in domestic low-return instruments or sometimes risky real estate, meaning that they are stuck in a situation that British Financial Services Authority former Chairman Adair Turner last week said at the Asia Society. He characterized it as a system of forced savings, reminiscent of that adopted by Japan and Korea in an earlier era. Excuse me, but beyond macroeconomic factors, I think that microeconomic factors are certainly also a major cause of the measured imbalances. And certainly, microeconomic factors are the key elements fueling the increasing friction between China and all of its foreign economic partners. Take, for example, the situation with regard to inward foreign investment. Of the 180 economies worldwide assessed by the Heritage Foundation, only 13 out of 180 score as more closed to foreign investment than mainland China. That's a fraternity that includes nations such as Sudan, Eritrea, and Cuba. And some might counter this assessment by saying, well, China actually attracts a lot of inward investment. And indeed, yes, it does, including from the United States. And I gave you a figure for that earlier of close to 100 billion US dollars. But China has seen significant inward investment because many companies have essentially calculated that they have no choice but to invest in China, no matter how unfavorable the terms, because of China's pure size and the importance of the China market. A recent report from the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations I thought was quite interesting and illustrated indirectly this situation. Looking at the data in that report, one sees that U.S. investment in China is predominantly concentrated in job-creating greenfield investment, new factories, new businesses, new facilities. Whereas China's rapidly expanding investment in the United States is almost all in mergers and acquisitions, basically buying existing U.S. companies. Mergers and acquisitions actually are exactly the sort of inward foreign investment that is extraordinarily difficult to accomplish in China. The current differences between China and the United States in economic policy, in fact, are much too extensive to mention in detail in any lunchtime speech. But please consider some highlights. America's internet. It permits a free flow of ideas and goods and services, and China's famously does not. U.S. tariffs, including on key products such as automobiles, are low. China's average tariff rate is 3 times as high as that of the United States. Intellectual property rights. The United States has very strong protections. China's are famously inadequate. I could, of course, go on, but what it all comes down to is that from the U.S. perspective, China's WTO commitments reflect somewhat of a broken contract. And from the perspective of the United States, the breaches in that contract are now sufficiently serious and detrimental to the United States that we are now justified in claiming damages. The U.S. Trade Representative has done considerable research on these issues, so I think it is useful to consider the bill of particulars that is associated with the United States' recent announcement that it may, in addition to suing China and the WTO, together with other like-minded nations, take additional actions that respond to China's unfair policies and practices under Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act. The focus of America's protests in that report are the Chinese government's actions related to technology transfer, intellectual property, and innovation, which the Section 301 report notes are unreasonable or discriminatory and burden or restrict U.S. commerce. And those measures include areas such as joint venture requirements, foreign investment restrictions, administrative review and licensing processes that force or pressure technology transfer from U.S. companies, discriminatory licensing processes to transfer technologies from U.S. companies to Chinese companies, directing and facilitating investments and acquisitions which generate large-scale technology transfer, and cyber intrusions into U.S. computer networks to gain access to valuable business information. Now, I imagine you didn't want to take notes through all that, and it's a bit technical, but the evidence in support of these claims is documented publicly in USTR's 180-page report, which I recommend for nighttime reading. But it is available online for you to download, and of course that download would be free of charge. But in sum, to keep things simple, the core problem is this. China's market-distorting policies and practices constrict the free market and directly harm the interests of all of its trading partners, including the United States. And this is especially vexing now that China's technological capabilities in some areas is approaching or reaching global best levels, making it much harder for China to justify its actions on the grounds of being a developing country. I worry, in fact, that there's a deeper problem that may be emerging, which is that China's recent policies may, and I say may, but may be based on the premise, which I think would be incorrect, that central control of the economy is what got China to this point of success in its growth. The American perspective is to believe that it was not central planning, but rather China's emerging pro-market and pro-investment policies, supplemented by access to the largest free markets in the world, that helped to write this impressive growth story that we've all witnessed in the People's Republic of China. So in a nutshell, our hope from the US is that China will actually double down on reform and double down on opening and boldly accelerate its embracing of global norms and worldwide best practices. So I imagine that you are curious about how I think all this might play out in the rough and tumble world of bilateral and multilateral economic diplomacy over the coming months and years. And in fact, we are at the Foreign Correspondents Club, and many tons of barrels of journalistic ink have been already spilled on speculation about these sort of things. I actually don't want to add too much more to that cottage industry, but let me just say this. Some analysts have said that given its size and importance, China is now too big to be challenged. I would submit that, in fact, the opposite is true. I think that the China problem that I've outlined for you is, in fact, too big to ignore. As I think I've demonstrated, recent U.S. decisions aimed at pressing China to raise its game on reform and opening, even at some risk to our own markets and economy, are, in fact, well-grounded in international law and in shared WTO principles. America's forcefulness in registering its complaints is well justified by the facts. And from our perspective, maybe perhaps it's even overdue. But at any rate, the time to start addressing these issues is now. To borrow a metaphor from my favorite sport, you get to guess which sport it is. China has drawn a yellow card, right? Yellow cards, what are yellow cards? Yellow cards are an opportunity for a player to change their style of play before someone gets hurt. Sticking to that same metaphor, some might object to the idea that of the United States appointing itself to be the referee. Why is it the U.S. that gets to do that? Well, I would respond actually that as the world's leading economy and leading custodian of the integrity of the international global trading system, of the WTO and the international trade rules, that the United States has a responsibility and, in fact, no other option. Allowing China to continue to systematically play outside the rules could, in fact, only lead to bigger problems globally in the future. I think it's important to note that other WTO partners are lodging many of the same complaints as the United States. And the international business community has also been very supportive of the United States' efforts to highlight our concerns. And importantly, in the end, this is not, I repeat, not a zero-sum game. We all still have an opportunity to create a virtuous cycle of redoubled global efforts to support market-based approaches and open borders. Because trade, after all, is between people, and it is, by definition, intended to be mutually beneficial. China has a chance to accelerate its reform and opening at a scale and pace that befits its influence in the global economy. And I think it's important to note that even China's economists admit that the kind of steps that the United States is calling for and is recommending would actually make the Chinese economy stronger and more resilient over the long term, which allows me to address another red herring. The United States does not want the Chinese economy to fail. We don't want the Chinese economy to be weak. That would be terrible for the United States. I've already explained to you how what an important trading partner China is and could be in the future for the United States. We just want China to change and live up to the many commitments that it has made under the WTO and in bilateral negotiations with the United States. And I think that's the win-win outcome that really everyone wants, and which should be, given hard work, entirely achievable. So let me wrap up today by turning to the implications of this situation for the most excellent city of Hong Kong. I know, in fact, that U.S.-China trade friction has created some nervousness here in Hong Kong, which is a part of China, but a separate customs jurisdiction under the one country, two systems framework. I noted earlier that a significant share of the physical goods traded between the United States and China pass through Hong Kong's ports. And in the non-physical sphere, an even greater share of U.S.-China investment flows and services transactions and financial transactions utilize Hong Kong's state-of-the-art financial markets and its world-class lawyers, some of whom are here today, and its fantastic bankers and accountants to lubricate U.S.-China economic transactions. So, admittedly, a degree of nervousness on the part of Hong Kong is understandable. One Hong Kong friend put it to me like this. He said that he was worried that Hong Kong will become he said, voiceless victim as Beijing and Washington take steps to work out their differences on international economic policy. I actually do not think that that will happen. I think that the current situation in an important way presents a real opportunity for for Hong Kong to demonstrate its lasting value. Let me say that again. an opportunity for Hong Kong to demonstrate its lasting value and be a transformative portal linking China and the rest of the world economy. Hong Kong, in fact, is the visible proof that an economy can be a part of China, but also be consistent with global best practices. With everyone making plenty of money and achieving prosperity, with everyone realizing win-win economic solutions without a lot of state intervention, and with government authorities respecting private property and the right of investors to make free decisions in a transparent system. This is possible because of Hong Kong's rules-based approach to commerce and regulation, and its fiercely independent judiciary, and its freedom of expression, and its freedom of the internet, and its highly liberal trade and investment and tax policies. Let's go back to that Heritage Foundation Economic Freedom Index I mentioned earlier, and you all know what's coming now. But Hong Kong famously keeps getting scored year by year as the world's #1, the world's most free economy every year. That's an amazing track record. It's not so much the rating, it's why. What about that global competitive index that I mentioned, where the United States came in and it's #2 behind Switzerland? Hong Kong's an impressive 6th overall in that index. The point is this: these facts are connected. Hong Kong is competitive precisely because it is free. This conclusion points toward what I hope will be Hong Kong's role as the United States and China work forward for a better future by reshaping our economic relationship. My hope is that Hong Kong will make full use of what I call its demonstration power. Its power to show just how much prosperity is possible when global best practices are applied in China as they are elsewhere. I've sometimes referred to the maintenance of Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy under the one country, two systems framework as a use it or lose it proposition. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. In this period of dynamic change, I think that Hong Kong actually has an opportunity to proactively use its autonomy to further strengthen its impressive economic competitiveness, as well as its inherent value proposition in the eyes of foreign partners. The Hong Kong private sector can do this by continuing to make good deals with counterparts from the United States, from China, and from elsewhere, making full use of the city's strengths as reflected in Hong Kong's rule of law and core values. The Hong Kong government can do this by energetically embracing and sharing this city's abiding strengths. For example, the government could try to find ways to demonstrate even more strongly its commitment to protecting intellectual property and to following global best practices for internet governance and for data privacy and for cross-border data flows. Regarding trade policy, the Hong Kong government's free trade agreement with ASEAN and the agreement under negotiation with our colleagues from Australia are very admirable examples of a creative and outward-thinking approach. But maybe Hong Kong could use this juncture right now to think outside the box and be even bolder in demonstrating its commitment to open markets. For instance, by joining additional international trading arrangements, or hosting high-level APEC meetings, or maybe even hosting another WTO ministerial meeting. I know everyone enjoyed it so much last time, and this time probably no one would be swimming across the harbor because it's too short. It's not challenging anymore. Let me close with a historical reference. This year, we are celebrating the 175th anniversary of the U.S. diplomatic presence here in Hong Kong. That's why I have this cryptic 175 badge on here today. When our first consul general started work here in 1843, his goal was to promote commerce between China and the United States. Later, at the turn of the century, the United States enunciated the open door policy, aimed at further expanding trade with China, and while pushing the European partners, or powers at the time, not so much partners, to play fair. Throughout the 20th century, the U.S. commercial presence in Hong Kong steadily expanded to the point where it is now very extensive. And for example, our American Chamber of Commerce here is among the largest in the region, if not the largest in the region. But this was always with an eye toward the Chinese market. So whether in 1843 or at the turn of the century or today, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The United States is still here in Hong Kong, still working to open doors to free and open trade and investment, and still believing that Hong Kong is an outstanding platform for promoting that trade and investment between China and America to the benefit of everyone involved. So I thank you for your attention and look forward to some questions and comments and dialogue. Thank you very much.
We do have time for some questions, and I would ask that you identify yourself and your news organization or whomever you work with. Yeah. Oh. Yep, right in front here.
Anybody? People are shy.
Hi, Ben Bland from the Financial Times.
Hi, Ben.
In the most recent human rights report from the State Department, there was concern raised about Beijing's growing encroachments in Hong Kong and pressure on political freedoms. So we know Hong Kong's already lost a lot of its freedom and autonomy. How much does it have to lose before the US government will invoke the clauses in the Hong Kong Policy Act that will mean it starts having to treat Hong Kong like the rest of mainland China, which it increasingly feels like to many people here? Thanks.
Thanks. For those of you who aren't aware, although I think many of you are, the Hong Kong Policy Act is the legislation that justifies or allows the United States to continue to treat Hong Kong as a separate jurisdiction from many of the kinds of business that the U.S. does with Hong Kong. So in terms of trade rules and et cetera, we apply a different set of rules to Hong Kong, and that's made possible through the Hong Kong Policy Act, even though Hong Kong is a part of China. The United States, as we frequently said, are strong supporters of the principle of one country, two systems, and Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. We think that's very, very important. We reiterate, and I did again today, the importance of that autonomy to Hong Kong's competitiveness, its future growth, and its viability as one of the world's leading cities. The report that you mentioned does flag some concerns about the central government's actions occasionally seeming inconsistent with its commitment to the high degree of autonomy and one country, two systems. And so we are always calling upon the colleagues in Beijing to respect those commitments and to maintain that strong commitment to a high degree of autonomy.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah, over here.
Paolo Venezia from Euromoney. Daniel Rosen from the Rhodium Group, down here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry.
Daniel Rosen from the Rhodium Group has talked about a post-engagement phase for the US-China relations. My question is this new, more confrontational approach to China. Do you think it has more chances of success than the engagement strategy that the US and the West has previously used to get concessions from China? Thank you.
So I think that the United States has been consistent over the years in calling for China to open up its economy, push forward with reform and opening. As I said today, there is a rising level of frustration in the United States about the pace of that change, and concern that pace may have slowed significantly. And so the U.S. is taking, I believe, forceful steps to get China's attention and to press forward with the point that we really want China, of its own devices, internally to think about what they can do to open up their economy and be a more friendly participant in the global economic sphere.
Other questions? Oh, there's one here.
Hi, this is Noah, also from Euromoney. Isn't there a more fundamental question here, which you raised in the middle of your speech, which is that China, on the one hand, is very high-tech and wealthy, but much of its population is still very poor. Isn't the real problem that we can no longer define countries simply by dividing one lot, categorizing them as developed countries and another as developing countries? Isn't that the fundamental problem that we should look at?
Let me put it this way: China clearly there's a lot of diversity in its economy. There are parts of China that are still quite poor. There are other parts that are globally significant centers of high-tech competition and increasingly active international participation in the economy. That's not a unique set of circumstances. What is unique and worrisome is the degree to which China is claiming a form of exceptionalism to global rules and best practices. And so our objective is to see from China, which is by all definitions an emerging economy, if not a mostly emerged economy, the kind of forward motion in opening its economy and reforming its economy to make it more friendly for international participation that is merited by its overall economic circumstances, as well as its incredibly important position in the planetary economy. It's too big to be left out of a fair global system.
Yeah, right here.
Mike Rouse, I have my own consulting company and occasionally in the newspaper and radio. I'd like to ask a group of questions about TPP. Would you like to see the USA back in the TPP? What do you think it would take to get back in? And can you offer any possible explanation of why it withdrew? And fourthly, I guess, to what danger is there that if you don't go back in, that China will start talking to the members and coming in itself and replacing the US as the rule setter?
I can't speak for China and its intentions with respect to the TPP once now CPTPP once the 11 economies that are in the TPP reach their agreement, which I think personally I expect will take place. For the United States, I think it's rather clear. You asked what happened. I think it's rather clear what happened is that the U.S. collectively did not feel confident that the agreement was going to work for us. And you saw that when both presidential candidates ran against that agreement. And so it's very much, I try not to talk about U.S. politics because it's never a good idea for a diplomat to do that. But the fact of the matter is that it was a political matter. Because the agreement had to be approved by Congress, and there was a lack of confidence in that agreement. President Trump has said that he will pursue free trade agreements that are good for the United States. And clearly we're committed to expanding and deepening economic ties across the entire Pacific region, including with the CPTPP, it was a mouthful, CPTPP countries, and including with China, including with everybody. So we'll see. If there were a substantially better deal, there may be some possibility. It's important to note we do have standing free trade agreements with 6 of the 11 countries in the TPP already.
We have time for 2 more questions. Yeah, right here.
Mr. Tong, I'm Gary from Mingpao. You spoke highly about Hong Kong, and it reminds me the question I asked your predecessor, Mr. McKiffin, and you last year about UK research fee treatment for Hong Kong people. 2 years ago, Mr. Kiffin told me that he didn't see the possibility in the near future to have that change. And last year, you told me during our interview that it's not necessarily impossible, but to make that happen, it requires a law to be passed by the U.S. Congress. Do you expect there would be some good news for us in the near future?
I don't have any specific update on, so that's a good question, and I'll give you essentially the same answer that I did previously. I don't think it's impossible. It does require a legislative fix. I've put personal energy into confirming that fact and exploring whether there was a way, shouldn't say this publicly either, but whether there was a way around having a legislative fix, but in fact it is necessary. And so I think it's an important idea to keep raising and just identifying the fact that Hong Kong does have, is recognized by many other locales around the world for visa-free treatment is a useful message to legislators in the United States, because it's a reflection of Hong Kong's autonomy. I think it's very important for Hong Kong to demonstrate, to show its autonomy, as I said in the speech, to talk about, to really make it even more apparent. I think it is apparent. When people come here, they understand it. They see Hong Kong. Wow, this economy and a society that works according to, very familiar, globally recognized principles. But it shouldn't be reliant upon people coming here. So I'm always looking for ways to assist Hong Kong in demonstrating that autonomy and demonstrating that demonstration power that I think it has as a beacon of market-based economics.
Okay, one more question in the back. Someone could get a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Consul General, for a very frank statement of the U.S. case on U.S.-China trade. My question is regarding the seeming lack of coordination in what we might consider to be the second round of the negotiating process with the Chinese. Mnuchin may go to China, he may not, or we don't know when. Liu He fairly famously came back from his more recent trip and said he wasn't even certain who he was supposed to be talking to. I guess my question is, do the optics here, and notwithstanding that I'm certain there are some back-channel discussions that are certainly happening below the media level, but does this speak to any degree of confusion or lack of coordination on the U.S. side in terms of how to follow up now that the basic case has been laid publicly? And does it speak maybe in particular to any difference in terms of strategic objectives in different elements of the U.S. policymaking community between USTR, state, the various offices of Navarro and Larry Kudlow and so on? Or does the administration genuinely speak with one voice, and this is all simply part of the broader negotiation strategy, maybe making the Chinese sweat a little bit before you finally do come to the table and talk turkey with them? Thanks.
Well, I guess 2 points in response to that. One is that there is a lot of communication between Washington and Beijing on all these issues that I raised today. A lot of communication. Not all of that is publicly apparent, but there is very, very significant and voluminous dialogue between the capitals. And then with respect to our internal processes in the United States, I am actually struck by the unity and sense of purpose in the administration with respect to the challenges presented by China in the economic sphere. There is really a strong sense that we've got a problem. We need to think about it carefully, but we need to think about it a bit urgently as well, and that is really a shared understanding. In fact, I think many people have pointed out that to an extent, much greater extent than at any time that I've experienced in the last decade or two, the U.S. business community is also sharing that sense of urgency and frustration, and is, even though some of the elements of tactics and strategy in addressing the problem could in fact create some risk for some businesses, we're experiencing very strong support from the United States business community, and in a sense that, well, this is the, as I said in my speech, this is the time to start to address these problems. You know, we'll do this in a fact-based, rational, collegial fashion with our interlocutors in China. They're, you know, this is a detailed kind of conversation, and it does take some time to reach understandings. But that the complexity should not be a reason for further delay.
Well, we'd like to thank the Council of the Whole, and you all know what's in here.
Thank you. I'm very happy to receive this mug. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming out and your patience, and please have a blessed day. Thanks.
Thank you all.